Welcome to Pro Control Training Videos. In this video, we're going to talk about processor events and their uses and functions in programming a system file. Processor events happen on the processor itself, independent of any remote or iOS device in the system. To access the processor events, double-click on your ProLink Z processor or ProLink R processor. In processor events, select the green Add, and you'll see a drop-down of events available to you. For the ProLink Z, there are 4 different processor events. There's a Sense event, which utilizes the 2 sense ports on the processor. There's a periodic event, which can go from 1 second all the way up to 6 hours. There's a startup event. In the event of a power cycle or a power failure, when the processor starts back up, it can be issued a series of commands. And there's a driver event. The first thing we'll get into is the Sense event. On the ProLink Z and ProLink R processor, there are 2 sense ports on pin 1 and 2 of the RJ45 for the Sense port. You can test against this port for many things. You can sense when the port goes high or the port goes low. For example, would be a cable box that has a USB power, a projector that has a 12 volt out, or anything that you just want to test a voltage against. And you can send a series of commands when that port 1 or 2, you can be user selectable on the right hand side here, goes high or low. You can then add commands to be sent from the processor. Now, since the processor is independent of the iPad or remote, the commands will only be run on the processor. So if you have a TV line of sight, you'll want to make sure that the commands you want to be sending will only be sent from the control processor. And you can add any macro to this window on the right, whether it's turning devices on, turning devices off, or simply just setting an input. The second event is the periodic event. Very handy if you have a receiver that has a sleep or a timeout function. You can test that receiver every 15, 30, or however long you'd like to test that receiver to see if it's still on. In the event of the device shuts off and you want to turn all your other devices off, you can test every 15 minutes. In this example, I'll simply, every 15 minutes, I'll add a system variable test. I'm going to see if my receiver is on, and then I'll just power off on any other devices. Or I can just turn on some lights or turn off some lights in the theater room. If that receiver is off, it will then turn everything off as well. The third example is a startup event. So if you have a system startup, if you're using flags, let's say the power's cut, the device is inadvertently unplugged, and you need to reset some flags, or you need to just clear out some variables, clear out some text. Anything you want to do in the event of a power failure, you can do on system startup. You can add commands, macros, anything you want to that as well. Just note, anytime you download to the processor or you download to the remote and a new connection is made, it will run the on system startup command. So if you're downloading, making changes, that processor is going to reset. When you do that, it's then going to run the system startup command. So just take note of that. The last one is the driver event. This one is probably the most powerful because there's so many different options and things you can do with it. In this example, I'm just going to go to our receiver power. When the main zone powers on, I'll then add a whole bunch of commands to send the TV on, maybe turn the Blu-ray player on. There's a lot of examples and things you can do with this, so you're not necessarily starting devices or starting up from your home page on your remote or your iPad, but it's physically located on the processor itself. You start getting to a lot more advanced programming, a lot more tricky things you can do. That also adds a little bit more of a headache when you get into troubleshooting. So just note that with this level of customization, there's also kind of gotchas along with that as well. Again, you can set this to many different things. In this example, I just have the weather. You can do alerts. You can do alerts cleared, current conditions, automatic sunrise, sunset. You can have the lights turn on and so forth. It really depends on the drivers that you have added to your system, all the things that you can do. So these are just examples. Again, you have the command here, then you have the macro that you can run whatever you want when this event is triggered. That about sums it up for the processor events. Again, if you have any questions, email us at support@procontrol.com or give us a ring.